The first time I saw her, I didn't know what to expect. My friend had invited me over after school to help him sort through some old boxes in the garage, and I figured it would be a routine visit. But the moment I stepped inside, there was something about the house warm, lived in, with the faint scent of vanilla and old books, that felt inviting in a way I hadn't anticipated. And then I saw her. She was standing near the doorway, tall and graceful, a kind of elegance that seemed effortless. Her hair, streaked with gentle silver, framed her face softly. She was arranging a small vase of flowers on the table, and when she looked up, her eyes met mine with a gaze that lingered just a beat too long. There was something quietly disarming about the way she looked at me, neither just polite nor purely maternal, and it made my chest tighten in a way I didn't fully understand. "You look so innocent," she said, almost casually, but the words hung in the air longer than they should have. "That's why I like having you here." I froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. Innocent? It was a word I wasn't used to hearing directed at me in that tone, and yet, somehow, it felt oddly flattering. My friend, oblivious, ran past me, calling out something about the boxes, leaving us in a quiet bubble. Her smile was warm but contained a hint of something more, an unspoken curiosity, maybe even a little admiration. I noticed the subtle way her fingers brushed against the edge of the table, how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and how her perfume, something floral but understated, drifted lightly in the air. My senses sharpened. Every small motion of hers felt magnified, charged with a quiet energy that made it impossible to look away. I tried to focus on the task at hand, carrying boxes and sorting through old books, but I kept catching glimpses of her. There was a softness in the way she moved, a kind of ease that made her seem unapproachably graceful, yet there was also something human, something inviting that made me want to be near her. When she handed me a book from the shelf, our fingers brushed, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a subtle jolt through me. I caught myself wondering, was it just my imagination, or was there something more in the way she looked at me? She spoke to me as though I were older than I felt, yet somehow also fragile, delicate in a way that made her want to protect me, or maybe just understand me. I wasn't sure. And that uncertainty, the mixture of admiration and confusion, made my heart race in ways I wasn't used to. By the time my friend called me back into the garage, I felt different. The world had shifted slightly, and I was hyper-aware of her presence even as I moved away. That brief, lingering interaction, her words, the soft brush of her hand, it left a quiet imprint on me, a subtle tug at my curiosity. Something told me this was just the beginning of a connection that would slowly unravel, layer by layer, in ways I couldn't yet imagine. A few days after that first encounter, I found myself back at my friend's house. This time, it wasn't about boxes or chores. He had gone out, and I had volunteered to help his mom with some small tasks around the house. At first, it felt ordinary, just carrying folded laundry, wiping countertops, or putting away dishes, but her presence transformed everything into something quietly charged. She was moving through the kitchen with a calm, measured grace, her movements effortless yet captivating. Every time she glanced at me, there was a fleeting warmth in her eyes, a tiny spark that made me feel both seen and slightly exposed. She spoke in a voice that was soft but confident, guiding me through small details like the placement of a vase or the alignment of books on a shelf. And though the words were mundane, the way she delivered them, leaning slightly closer, letting her hand hover near mine for just a fraction of a second, made my heart stumble. We fell into a rhythm, a quiet dance of shared tasks. At one point, she handed me a stack of books, and our fingers brushed longer than necessary. The touch was subtle, almost accidental, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. I realized I was acutely aware of everything about her, the warmth radiating from her hand, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the air around her, the soft rustle of her clothes as she moved. It was intoxicating in a way that made me both nervous and exhilarated. She smiled at me then, a slow, knowing smile that seemed to acknowledge the tension without speaking it aloud. "You're careful," she said softly. "I like that." Her words were casual, almost offhand, but there was a depth to her tone, an intimacy hidden beneath the surface. I wasn't sure if it was admiration or something else, something I couldn't quite name, and that uncertainty made my pulse quicken. As we continued working, I noticed small, deliberate gestures, the way she leaned closer when showing me where to place a book, the subtle brush of her shoulder against mine as we moved past each other, the way her eyes followed my movements with quiet interest. Every detail felt magnified, charged with an energy I hadn't experienced before. I wanted to reach out, to mirror her touches, but I held back, uncertain of the boundary between respect and desire. By the time the tasks were finished, I felt a strange mixture of accomplishment and longing. The house seemed different somehow, warmer, more alive, filled with the quiet hum of connection. I realized I was leaving with more than just a sense of having helped. I was leaving with the memory of her glance lingering on me, the faint brush of her hand still tingling on mine, and a growing curiosity about the woman who had really noticed me, in a way that no one else had. That day, something shifted. The seed of a connection had been planted, subtle yet undeniable. Every ordinary interaction between us carried a weight I couldn't yet articulate, a silent promise of moments yet to come. And though nothing had been said, I knew, deep down, that our bond was slowly beginning to take shape, one fleeting touch, one shared smile at a time. A week later, I found myself back at the house again, this time under the pretense of helping my friend with schoolwork. But as it often happened, I ended up spending most of my time with her. The evening had settled into a warm, golden glow through the living room windows, dust particles dancing lazily in the light. She was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her, flipping through a stack of old photo albums, and I perched on the edge of the armchair, pretending to focus on homework. At first, our conversation was casual comments about the weather, the mundane ebb and flow of everyday life. But gradually, the topic shifted, inching towards something deeper. I found myself telling her about feeling overlooked among my peers, about moments when I thought I didn't quite fit in. She listened intently, not interrupting, her expression soft but attentive. There was an almost imperceptible nod of understanding in her eyes, a quiet empathy that made me feel safe enough to speak openly. Then she began to share herself, too. Stories of her youth, small regrets, lessons learned. She spoke not with bitterness but with a reflective calm, like someone who had seen the world and emerged tempered but not hardened. Her voice was low and soothing, a gentle cadence that seemed to fill the room with warmth. I noticed how she leaned slightly closer when she spoke, her hand resting lightly on the couch near mine, almost brushing my knee without actually touching it. The proximity was electric, subtle, deliberate, yet entirely appropriate, and I couldn't help but be acutely aware of every detail, the soft rustle of her blouse, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her shoulder. At one point, our hands did meet, just barely, as I passed her a photo, and the contact lingered a moment longer than necessary. I felt a jolt of awareness run through me, my heart beating faster, my senses sharpened. There was no rush, no pressure, only the quiet acknowledgement of something unspoken. I could see it in her eyes too, a mixture of curiosity, affection, and something tenderly vulnerable. For a long while, we simply sat together, letting the silence stretch between us comfortably. The quiet was not empty, it was full of shared understanding, of recognition that we were seeing one another in a way few people ever had. I realized then that what drew me to her wasn't just physical, it was the way she made me feel understood, accepted, and somehow, noticed. By the time I left that evening, I was walking home with a strange, lingering warmth in my chest. The memory of her shoulder brushing against mine, her eyes soft and intent, and the low hum of her voice replayed in my mind. Something had shifted, a subtle but unmistakable bond had formed. It wasn't romance yet, not in any overt way, but it was something that promised possibility. Something that made me ache quietly for the next time I would be near her, to share another fleeting moment of closeness and connection. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I had gone over to help with some small household chores, expecting another routine visit, but the day took an unexpected turn. I was carrying a stack of folded laundry toward the living room when I tripped slightly over the edge of the rug. Before I could steady myself, her hand shot out, steadying me. Her fingers wrapped around mine, and for a moment, she held me there longer than necessary. Not forcefully, but with a gentle firmness that made my chest tighten. I could feel the warmth of her hands seep into mine, the soft pressure a grounding, electrifying sensation all at once. Her thumb brushed against my skin as if almost unconsciously, and I felt a shiver run up my arm. The room seemed to shrink around us, every sound, the faint ticking of the clock, the rustle of curtains and the breeze amplified in the hush of that moment. Our eyes met, and there it was again, that subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of attraction. It wasn't overt, not even slightly, it was a quiet, deliberate intimacy. Her gaze held a mixture of curiosity and affection, and I realized she was watching me as closely as I was watching her. I wanted to pull away, to remind myself that this was just a friendly gesture, but something kept me rooted, aware of every fraction of a second. After helping me regain my balance, she didn't immediately release my hand. Instead, her fingers lingered near mine, brushing softly, almost imperceptibly, as if testing the boundary between comfort and desire. I could feel the pulse of her warmth, the gentle steadiness that contrasted with my own fluttering heartbeat. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't quite articulate: admiration, nervousness, a strange thrill at the closeness, and a hint of fear at how aware I was of her presence. She let out a soft laugh, breaking the tension but not the connection. "Careful," she said, her voice low, almost teasing. Her hand finally withdrew, but the memory of her touch remained, etched sharply into my senses. I found myself acutely aware of how her presence seemed to fill the room, how every slight motion, the tilt of her head, the brush of her hair behind her ear, carried weight. It was intoxicating. For the rest of the afternoon, we worked side by side, and though our hands didn't meet again, there was a new layer to every interaction. The subtle glances, the slight brush of shoulders as we passed each other, the quiet proximity of our bodies, all of it hummed with unspoken tension. I was aware of her in a way that went beyond casual observation. Every detail of her, the warmth of her skin, the softness of her hair, the gentle cadence of her voice, seemed magnified. By the time I left, I walked home with a strange mixture of exhilaration and restraint. That fleeting touch had changed something. It was a small, silent acknowledgement that something was stirring between us, a connection that was growing slowly but undeniably. And I knew, with a clarity I hadn't felt before, that this was only the beginning of something far more intense, far more personal, than either of us had admitted even to ourselves. It was late afternoon when I returned to her house again, ostensibly to help my friend with some project. But as usual, most of my attention ended up on her. The sunlight streamed through the living room windows, casting a warm glow that made the ordinary space feel intimate, almost sacred. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, and the simple domestic scene was made extraordinary by her presence, the gentle sway of her hair, the quiet rhythm of her movements, and the faint scent of herbs and vanilla that clung to her. We fell into an easy rhythm, moving around the kitchen together. She handed me a cutting board, our fingers brushing briefly as she did, and I caught a spark in her eyes, one that mirrored the spark I felt flickering inside me. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but in that moment, I was acutely aware of the electricity of proximity. Every glance, every small gesture, seemed charged with meaning, as though our bodies and minds were quietly communicating things we were too cautious to speak aloud. At one point, she reached toward me to brush a bit of flour off my cheek. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary, soft against my skin, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. The warmth of her touch, the delicate pressure, seemed to anchor me while simultaneously unsteady me. It was a paradoxical sensation, comfort wrapped in tension, familiarity mixed with a thrilling uncertainty. Her eyes searched mine for a reaction, and I realized she was fully aware of the effect she had on me, just as I was aware of the effect she had on me. Our conversation turned playful. She teased me lightly about my awkwardness in the kitchen, and I found myself laughing more freely than I had in days. The teasing wasn't just humorous, it was intimate, a dance of words that drew us closer emotionally without ever crossing the boundary of propriety. I noticed the way her body leaned slightly toward mine when she spoke, how her hand occasionally brushed mine again, deliberately or not, leaving a trail of warmth. In those moments, I felt the realization settle like a weight in my chest. There was something undeniably mutual in our attraction. It wasn't just me noticing her, or her noticing me, it was a quiet, simmering acknowledgement that we both sensed the tension, the longing, and the curiosity that had been building slowly, carefully, over time. There was a thrill in that recognition, but also a caution. Neither of us was ready to leap, yet neither could deny the pull that seemed to draw us closer with each passing moment. As the evening wound down, I noticed a subtle shift in our dynamic. We were still cautious, still careful not to overstep, but there was an unspoken understanding that something had changed. The lingering touches, the sustained glances, the quiet warmth of her presence, they were no longer accidental. They were deliberate signals, a slow, seductive acknowledgement of the connection between us. Walking home later, I couldn't stop replaying her smile, the brush of her fingers, the low laugh that had felt so personal, so intimate. That day, I realized with startling clarity that our relationship was no longer casual, no longer innocent in the way it had once seemed. It had evolved into something delicate, potent, and undeniably real, the quiet beginning of a romance that neither of us could ignore. It was a quiet evening when it finally happened. The house was still, the usual hum of the outside world softened into distant murmurs, leaving only the two of us in a gentle cocoon of warmth. I had stayed later than usual under the pretext of helping my friend with some late-night project, but the truth was, I wanted to be near her, to linger in the moments that had been slowly building between us for weeks. We were in the living room, sitting on the couch, the space between us smaller than usual. She had picked up a book I had left behind earlier, flipping through it casually, but I noticed the way her eyes occasionally lifted to mine. There was a softness there, an unspoken question in her gaze, and I felt my chest tighten in response. I realized she was no longer hiding her attention, and neither was I. Then, almost without warning, she spoke, her voice low, deliberate, yet warm. "I like having you here," she said. "There's something about you, something honest, something unguarded. That innocence, the way you see the world, it draws me in." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. I was struck by their sincerity, by the vulnerability she was allowing herself to show. It was a confession of sorts, though carefully measured, an acknowledgement of the tension that had been simmering quietly between us. My throat went dry, and for a moment, I struggled to find a response that wouldn't betray the whirlpool of emotions inside me. She shifted slightly, leaning closer, her hair brushing my shoulder. Her hand moved almost unconsciously, fingers grazing the side of my face as if testing the boundary, the reaction. The contact was soft but deliberate, sending a wave of warmth through me, a mixture of comfort and electric anticipation. I could feel the steady pulse of her presence, the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat, and I became acutely aware of how much I wanted to lean in, to close the space between us, yet part of me hesitated, honoring the subtle tension we had cultivated all along. I don't usually feel this way," she continued, her words trembling slightly, though her composure remained. "But you make it different." The honesty in her tone was disarming. In that moment, I realized that the longing, the curiosity, the slow-building attraction I had felt was reciprocated fully, intimately. We were suspended in that delicate space, emotionally exposed, aware of the depth of our connection, and yet restrained by the care we took not to rush it. I reached out, hesitating just a heartbeat before letting my hand brush hers. The touch was electric in its simplicity, a quiet affirmation of everything we were feeling but had not spoken aloud. Our eyes met, and in them, I saw the reflection of my own emotions, admiration, desire, and a profound recognition of a bond that had taken weeks to form, now undeniable. The evening ended without dramatic gestures, without crossing boundaries, but the tension had transformed into something deeper, a shared understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of attraction, and an emotional intimacy that was both thrilling and comforting. That night, I left knowing that nothing would ever be the same, and yet everything felt perfectly right. Weeks had passed since that quiet confession, and the dynamic between us had shifted in subtle, undeniable ways. I found myself returning to her home often, under one pretext or another, yet each visit no longer felt ordinary. The house, once just a place for casual errands or homework, now carried a warmth that seemed to exist solely because she was there, her presence infusing the rooms with life. That afternoon, I arrived to find her sitting in the living room, a book balanced on her lap. She looked up as I entered, and her smile, slow, genuine, and just a little teasing, made my chest tighten. It was no longer the cautious warmth of previous weeks, but something more confident, more intimate. She gestured toward the couch, and I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders brushed. The contact was light, but it carried weight, a subtle reassurance, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we had nurtured. We spent the afternoon in gentle conversation, our words weaving between trivialities and deeper reflections. She talked about a memory from her youth, I shared a small victory from school, and yet, beneath the casual exchange, there was an undercurrent of connection, a quiet understanding that neither of us had to speak the obvious aloud. Every glance, every smile, and every brush of fingers held meaning. Even the smallest gestures, like her hand resting near mine on the armrest, seemed charged with mutual affection and familiarity. At one point, she reached over to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Her fingers lingered against my cheek for a moment, light but deliberate, and I felt a warmth spread through me. It was a touch that carried no urgency, no pressure, just the steady, comforting intimacy of someone who cared deeply and fully. I returned the gesture, letting my hand hover near hers, mirroring the closeness without breaking the delicate balance we had cultivated. We laughed softly together at a shared joke, our heads tilting toward each other naturally, and I realized how comfortable this closeness had become. What had begun as curiosity and fascination had transformed into something profoundly human and deeply affectionate. It was the ease of being together, the quiet confidence in our connection, and the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust and understanding. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the room, she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine in a way that felt both natural and intimate. Our eyes met, and in that shared glance, there was an acknowledgement of everything we had built, the lingering touches, the subtle glances, the unspoken attraction, and the emotional intimacy that had grown so gradually, so deliberately, over time. When I finally left that evening, I walked home with a sense of quiet contentment. There was no dramatic declaration, no rushed gestures, just the warm certainty that our connection was real, mutual, and lasting. We had found a rhythm together, a gentle, emotionally safe intimacy that respected boundaries while celebrating closeness. And in that slow, deliberate unfolding, I understood that some bonds, nurtured carefully and patiently, could create a warmth and depth far beyond anything fleeting or hasty. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a moment or a fleeting feeling. It was a relationship, subtle, tender, and deeply human, and it was ours, exactly as it should be.